concludes by making concrete recommendations to really have a real shift on human rights in Zimbabwe, to both the government of Zimbabwe as well as the international community. So when we look at specific findings, or rather documented violations during this period of 5 years, it is very clear that there has been a serious curtailment of the right to freedom of expression as well as access to information. In fact, when we look at the content here, we see that history has repeated itself. Under the Mugabe administration, the government passed the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act in 2002. This act was used to silence dissent. Sorry. It's in fact when the bill was introduced, it was described at some point as the most calculated and determined assault on our liberties guaranteed under the Constitution. Following the inception of this act, at least 21 journalists were arrested and charged under different provisions of this act. Of course, it was later repealed around 2019, but we fast forward to 2023 and we see the emergence or the introduction of the Patriotic Bill. This bill criminalizes willfully damaging the sovereignty and national interests of Zimbabwe, which is obviously overly broad and it leaves it open to abuse by the state. It was introduced also in the run up to the elections. So this bill is introduced in a context where there are already very concerning events when it comes to freedom of expression. There are several examples you will read about in the briefing, but one which I wish to highlight is the 2020 abduction, beating, sexual assault, and arbitrary arrest of Joanna, Netsai, and Cecilia, sorry, in 2020. And these were women who led anti-government protests. So this is happening in a context where we are seeing a spate of prosecutions, which are likely to increase, especially we also see the introduction of other tools of repression, including, for example, the Cyber and Data Protection Act and other laws which aim to silence dissent. We also see an increase in a culture of intimidation and harassment of journalists, which has persisted under the current government. And since the 2018 election, we've also documented a series of incidents where journalists were persecuted and were prevented from doing their work. So the past 5 years really paints a very disturbing picture of the curtailment of freedom of expression, curtailment of rights to access information, and tools which are designed to silence dissent. We also have documented over the past 5 years serious attacks that really show that you either remain silent or you risk arrest. Here we see that under the Mugabe administration, the response to protest was violence and excessive use of force. And we see now that that has not changed. We've seen, in terms of freedom of peaceful assembly and association, that there have been activists who are arrested, university students also being arrested when they try to protest or assemble. Especially, we've seen more recently opposition party activists who have been not granted or allowed to enjoy their rights to peaceful assembly and association. We've also seen a trend of persecution by prosecution. And here we've seen prominent cases where the aim of prosecution appears to be persecution rather than the objective pursuit of justice. We've seen courts being used to silence dissent. We've seen courts having a lack of judicial independence. And we've even seen malicious charges and people being dragged through lengthy court processes with a view to silence them. And you will read about specific examples of some cases injured severely by authorities, people being in protest with gunshot wounds inflicted by authorities, people being attacked and bitten by police dogs, and various other attacks where there's excessive use of force. We further see arbitrary arrests increased and many people being held in detention. We've seen raiding of homes, door-to-door brutality, and attacks on occupants of homes, and we've seen many incidents of torture as well. We've also seen rights to fair trial not being observed during this period, where trials have been fast-tracked and there have been routine denials of bail, as well as people being denied their access to lawyers. And there are detailed examples again, which you will read about in the briefing. Not only have civil and political rights been affected, but we've also seen a serious erosion of economic, social, and cultural rights. Amnesty produced a report around fistula, obstetric fistula, which was entitled "I Never Thought I Could Get Healed from This." And in this report, it shows very clearly that the government has not allocated enough resources to the health sector to deal with these issues of women experiencing obstetric fistula while giving birth. We've also witnessed that the right to health has been effective for young people, youth, through the report that Amnesty has issued called uh, Lost Without Knowledge. And this report details barriers to sexual and reproductive health information in Zimbabwe. Here we see that in this report that there are critical gaps and a lack of information and a lack of clear legal frameworks and requirements regarding um, third party consent for health services. And this leads to an ambiguity on the rights of adolescents. This then means that adolescents are not clear on what entitlements they have under the law to access sexual and reproductive health services. Not only have the right to health been affected, but we've also seen the right to housing affected, with many families left homeless because of evictions. We also show detailed examples of these cases where in the past 5 years, people have lost and not enjoyed their right to housing. Obviously, between the 2018 and 2019 period, the COVID 19 pandemic also hit Zimbabwe. And there we saw that there was um, lack of healthcare services. The healthcare services that were provided were inadequate. Not only was that a problem, but there was also extensive lockdowns, which restricted various rights, including the right to freedom of movement, which directly affected people's ability to eke a livelihood and, for example, to work. We also saw people lacking in food and water, and more concerning, we saw that the government or the authorities use the COVID context as a pretext for further curtailment of various rights in the country, including the right to freedom of assembly. So these are some of the key challenges and violations that we saw in the past 5 years. And my colleague will detail some of the recommendations regarding this. But finally, one of the most concerning um, findings or documented issues we saw is the issue of statelessness, where Amnesty also issued a report which was entitled "We Are Like Stray Animals," and it documents that thousands are living on the margins due to statelessness in Zimbabwe. And we highlighted that the government has failed to remove the administrative obstacles to the enjoyment of citizenship, which has a direct impact on the rights of a host of fundamental rights by these groups who do not have rights to citizenship. So with that, I would like to hand over back to you, Richard, and to Lucia to really talk through some of the detailed recommendations that we make specifically to the government of Zimbabwe, but also to other actors who have the potential to influence and really assist in us realizing some of these key human rights which have not been enjoyed in the last period. Thank you, and over to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Kenyo. So, colleagues, that was Kenyo Faris from our Southern African Regional Office, giving us the methodology and findings from the advocacy brief that you are launching today. I will now hand over this mic to the Executive Director of Amnesty International Zimbabwe, Lucia Masuku, to give us the recommendations that came from the advocacy brief. Lucia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Richard, and thanks, Kanyo, for taking us through the contents of the advocacy briefing, highlighting the human rights violations that we observed during the period 2018 to 2023, as well as highlighting the trends when we compare with the violations that we also observed during the late President Robert Mugabe's administration. I'm now going to take you through the recommendations which are directed to three actors: the government of Zimbabwe, SADC, and the African Union. Can I continue? Yes, so we have 7 recommendations that we are directing to the government of Zimbabwe. The first recommendation really calls upon the government to adhere to the constitution. We do have a constitution that has comprehensive provisions that relate to human rights. We have a constitution that enshrines principles and values that underpin the protection of human rights. But what we noted through the findings is that there hasn't been adherence to the constitution. And one particular trend that we picked up is the enactment of pieces of legislation that impact on the enjoyment of rights, pieces of legislation such as the amendment to the Criminal Code, also known in other circles as the Patriotic Bill, which has an impact on freedom of expression. So our call to government is that there is need to adhere to the constitution, and in practical terms, this will entail the repealing of provisions that violate fundamental human rights, as well as enactment of pieces of legislation that protect and promote human rights. So that is our first recommendation directed to government. Then the second recommendation relates to the issue of impunity that we also observed through the policy briefing. Our call is for government to end impunity, and this can be achieved by genuinely addressing past injustices that are recorded in the history of this country to ensure that there is non-recurrence of the violence that we saw over the years, as well as facilitating access to justice and accountability through investigating cases, as well as punishing all acts of violence by both state and non-state actors. So that is our second recommendation to the government. The third recommendation relates to issues around economic, social, and cultural rights that we highlighted in the briefing. There is need for government to fulfill these rights. So we do have them on paper, we do have them in the constitution, but the reality on the ground is that there are very limited programs or no programs and policies as well as practices that actually advance these particular rights. In our briefing, we took note of the issue of the right to health, particularly maternal health, the observations that we made around the issue of obstetric fistula. We are calling upon government to equip and resource health institutions in order for people to enjoy their rights to health, as well as desisting from conduct that interferes with the enjoyment of these rights. Then the fourth recommendation is on the issue of the independence of the judiciary. We are calling upon government to adopt effective measures to ensure an independent and impartial judiciary that protects the rights of people and that people have the confidence in to enable them to seek recourse from the courts. The fifth recommendation centers around the need for government to ratify the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the establishment of the African Court and depositing Article 34, declaration, which gives individuals and NGOs access to these courts. This is an important recommendation for us because it enables those who cannot get internal remedies to then approach this court for remedies that relate to violation of rights. Then the sixth recommendation relates to the need for government to take effective measures administratively and legislatively to end statelessness, particularly as it relates to descendants of migrants of SADC countries. Our constitution provides that all descendants of SADC countries that were born in Zimbabwe at the time that the 2013 constitution was enacted are citizens by birth. But on the ground, we still have many of those that don't have access to documentation or citizenship. And it's simply because, one, the Citizenship Act has not been aligned to the Constitution, and then secondly, there are administrative barriers which militate against these groups obtaining the requisite documentation and citizenship. So there's need to address in practical terms those administrative barriers to facilitate access to documentation by this particular group. Then the last recommendation relates to the use of force, excessive force, as well as the use of firearms by law enforcement agencies. From the findings that Khanyo shared, we did pick up the use of firearms during protests, which led to the death of quite a number of people. We are calling upon government to adopt and strengthen implementation of rules and regulations that relate to the use of firearms and force. Then to SADC, we have two recommendations to SADC. One that relates to the need for them to just redouble their efforts to ensure the Zimbabwean authorities end human rights violations, as simple as that, because these violations are documented. Then the second recommendation is for them to ensure safety of Zimbabweans, particularly during the election cycle, where there are incidences of violence and intimidation that we have documented and recorded over the years. To the African Union, we also have two recommendations. We're calling upon the African Union to pay attention to the deteriorating human rights situation and call on Zimbabwe to uphold its obligations under the African Union Constitutive Act, as well as under the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Then the second recommendation is directed to the African Commission, where we are calling upon the African Commission to undertake a country visit through its special mechanisms to investigate allegations of human rights, but also to then publicly condemn the violations that we have observed over the years. So these are our recommendations, which are directed to these three actors. Thank you, and I will hand over back to Richard.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lucia. Colleagues, apologies for the technical glitches when Khanyo Faris was presenting. Our sincere apologies about that. But now I'm going to open the floor for a quick round of questions. We are going to make this round a brief one. So yeah. I recognize Londolozi, yes, Pindai. We have so Mulo, you can
Okay, thank you so much. Londolozi Ndlovu is my name from the Voice of America. My question to you is concerning the bill that is said to be brought back to Parliament, which is the PVO bill. As Amnesty International, are you part of the efforts, or are you part of the team that has actually engaged the government on the need to reconsider its stance on the PVO bill, considering that we've seen the president actually bring it back to Parliament, meaning that there could be changes? That's my question.
My name is Peter Itue from South Africa's ENCA TV. My question is, comparing, you have launched this report, comparing this period under Mnangagwa regime with the Mugabe regime, is it worse? Is this regime worse in terms of human rights violation, or Mugabe was better?
All right, thank you. My name is Tonio. I'm in Checkmate TV. I just need to understand, as far as the recommendations are concerned, how receptive have these three major organizations, have they been to your past and your current recommendations? How has been the progress so far, and how receptive are they to these recommendations? And should we be expecting any action from them as far as your past relations are concerned? Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. If I got the questions right from Mlondolozi, you asked about the PVO bill and whether the movement was engaged in so far as the processes that led to the PVO bill coming back to Parliament were concerned. And then from Pindai, you asked us to give a comparative analysis between this current administration and the previous one. Should I give the mic to you, Lucia?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for the questions. I will respond to Mulondolozi's question, and I will leave the other two questions for my colleagues, Bongai and Kanyo. So in respect of the PVO bill, indeed, as Amnesty International, we were engaged in advocacy efforts that were directed to government in various ways. So from the start in 2021, we actually prepared an analysis in terms of the implications of this particular piece of legislation, which we then used in terms of mobilizing our members and our activists who wrote letters to the relevant ministers at that time, as well as specific parliamentarians. Then we also issued a number of quotes and press releases, as well as articles that we covered in the media. And we worked together also as part of the CSO groups that were pushing for against the enactment of this particular piece of legislation. So indeed, quite a lot of work, but also our regional office was also instrumental, because last year at the African Commission, they also made submissions to the Commission in respect of how this bill infringed specific rights. So this is what we've been doing as a movement, and not just the Zimbabwean office, not just the African region, but our members globally also added their voices in terms of pushing back against the enactment of the PVO bill. I'll hand over to Wangai and Kanyo for the other questions.
Is it on? Okay. So Pindai, my response is no. we are not. It looks like a comparison, but we are not saying President Robert Mugabe was better. This is taking audit or stock of the period that President Mnangagwa's administration took over. When they took over, how has the human rights record been so far? Why are we doing this? Because Zimbabwe's human rights record has been of concern over the past. We've been worried about the deteriorating human rights record under President Robert Mugabe's period. Now, when President Emmerson Mnangagwa took over, he pledged, he outlined a vision of a new and prosperous Zimbabwe, and he promised to break away from the past. And so we are not seeing the efforts to break away from the past. As my colleagues mentioned, there are tools that we've seen under Robert Mugabe's era that are continuing being used. So is this a continuation? Maybe that is the question. And so we are saying that there is an opportunity for President Emmerson Mnangagwa to actually right the wrongs of the past and improve Zimbabwe's human rights record. Okay. If I got it correctly, it's in relation to the three the government of Zimbabwe, SADC, and AU, how receptive. Okay. I think for us, our reports, when they put out recommendations, one of the things is recommendations to the government, because the government has an obligation to respect human rights. And so we are reminding the Zimbabwe government of its obligation. It has signed to several protocols within the region, and it has signed to several UN treaties, and many of these relate to upholding, protecting, respecting human rights. So for us, whether they are receptive, we will still remind or not, we will still remind them that these are your obligations. You signed up to this, and you're falling short of what you committed to doing, including upholding those rights. In relation to SADC, yes, we will, and the AU, I think part of what we will do is actually to continue engaging them, have advocacy meetings, and highlight our concerns. Whether they are receptive, they are regional and continental bodies, and so it is up to them to ensure that the protocols or the treaties that Zimbabwe signed up to are respected and upheld.
Thank you so much, Wangai and Lucia. I hope, colleagues, you answered. Did I? Yes, Mulonduloz. Okay, great. Tonio. All right. In the last 5 minutes, I will invite a further round of questions. I think 2 or 3 questions, and then we close for today. No further questions. Going once. Twice. Tonio. Yes.
So maybe outside particularly spoken about, but just to understand what role is Amnesty International playing specifically in protecting the victims of these various violations that have been ongoing? What role are you playing, and what role do you continuously play to safeguard and protect Zimbabweans that could be facing these kind of violations?
Thank you. My name is Rumitaichi Zarora, and I'm a freelance journalist. I wanted to find out, in the event that you said you already spoke to the 3 organizations involved, this is the government, etc. In the event that they don't react accordingly to what you expect, for example, you said adhering to the Constitution, in the event that they don't, or whatever, we continue having the human rights violation, what is the plan that Amnesty International has?
Thank you so much. So the 2 questions from Tonio, you said that what role does okay, we'll take, this is the last question, right?
Thank you so much. I'm Nathan Guma from the News Office. Yeah, so judging from the findings that you've just presented over the past 5 years, I would just like to ask, how do you see or how do you view Zimbabwe's re-engagement program in the next term, in President Mnangagwa's next term, is re-engagement is largely being anchored on rights?
Okay, can you repeat the question, please?
Okay. So, from the findings that you've just presented, I just want to know how you view Zimbabwe's re-engagement program in the next 5 years in President Mnangagwa's next, in his second term. Is Zimbabwe's re-engagement with other international organizations, for example, the Commonwealth, EU, has largely been based on rights?
Sorry, just a follow-up. I also wanted to find out, in your findings, you had victims that you mentioned. How did you assist them, as in what exactly did you do?
Thank you so much, colleagues. The first question from Tonio. I think you asked what role does AI play? Is that correct, Tonio? Yes.
Specifically with the victims in mind, what have they been doing?
Yeah, with the victims of human rights violations. And also there was a question that raised in the event that the authorities don't honor the recommendation, what do you do? And yeah, and another question was raising from the findings, how do you view Zimbabwe's re-engagement? That one I won't entertain it, but it's up to you.
Let me start with the last two. So we have not yet met the government, but this report will be shared with the government so that it is part of their human rights agenda. I think the government has just been formed now, and so we are questioning what is your human rights agenda, what is your plan for human rights in the next 5 years, given that this is what we have observed of the past 5 years. So we're using this as a human rights agenda for the government. And so what is our plan? Our plan, I think you know that Amnesty is a campaigning organization. Our plan is to campaign, and we will continue to campaign. Campaigning takes various forms. It can be through written letters to government. It can be through one-on-one meetings, and we'll be seeking meetings to engage with government. And we hope they'll open the door for us if they are also genuine about engaging with Amnesty. Regarding and as you know, Amnesty is a membership-based organization with over 10 million members. So we will be seeking our members to write to the government to prioritize human rights in the next 5 years. Regarding the re-engagement program, we don't know what it looks like in the next for the next 5 years for the President Emmerson Mnangagwa administration, what their priorities are. However, what we would like to say is they must put human rights at the center of those priorities. Whether it is open for business kind of re-engagement, human rights must be at the center. Thank you. I'll hand over to Lucia.
Thanks, Toneo, for the question around the role that Amnesty International plays in protecting people facing violations. I think Bongai has already highlighted that as Amnesty International, we campaign, and the interventions that we make take various forms. The approach of campaigning is really to put pressure on governments to act. So in our context, we have actually done so through various ways. Firstly, we stand in solidarity with victims of human rights violations. So if you go to court, we have our members and activists who actually attend court sessions just to be with the victims of human rights violations, because if you talk to activists and human rights defenders, they tell you that it can get so lonely when it comes to the trials, and sometimes you start reflecting and questioning why in the first instance you engaged in activism. So that's what we do, standing in solidarity and being there with them. But we also write to governments, like Bongai indicated, not just as members in Zimbabwe. So I'll give you an example to say the case relating to Cecilia, Johanna, and Netsai. Our members globally adopted that case through our Right for Rights campaign, and they wrote to the government, they wrote to the three ladies standing in solidarity with them. So that's part of the intervention. And then generally, our work that is meant to exert pressure on governments through various means, the engagement of regional bodies, the engagement of international bodies, is all targeted at ensuring that we protect the rights of victims. So that's what I would say in brief.
Thank you so much, Lucia. Thank you so much, Bongai. I hope colleagues, you were answered. Unfortunately, our time is a bit of a problem. We are going to adjourn for today. Just to say that we have issued a press release, and the advocacy brief is now live on our website, the Amnesty International website, as well as the Amnesty International Zimbabwe website. I have circulated the press release and advocacy briefing with you, and we'll be waiting for the questions. If you want us to arrange one-on-one interviews, please see me after this press conference. We also have a hard copy of the advocacy briefing. So before you leave, make sure that you see Tinashe, who will give you a copy of this briefing. But all the same, thank you so much, colleagues. I'll hand over this time to my colleague, Lucy Chivasa, to give you a warm vote of thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Richard. To the esteemed members of the Fourth Estate, we are truly grateful for the time that you took to come to our press conference. We thank you for the continued collaborations and partnerships as we campaign for human rights in Zimbabwe. So we would like to thank you for making time to come. I also want to thank colleagues at the regional office for the time that they put into putting together this advocacy brief, and the time that they also take to work on human rights issues in Zimbabwe. I would also want to extend our gratitude to the International Secretariat for the help that they also give us. For the help that they also give us as we continue to defend human rights, as we continue to defend civic space, as we continue to advocate for freedom of expression and association in Zimbabwe. We are truly thankful. As Richard indicated, if you guys want further interviews or one-on-one questions with our members, you can see Richard for that. Otherwise, thank you very much for taking time to come to the press conference. Thank you.